Hi, everyone. Welcome back to episode 2 of our continuous quality improvement series, Strategies, Approaches, and PPPs.
These are our 3 objectives for today's episode. Please have your handout nearby to take notes.
Your prevention work is made up of programs, policies, or practices, which you have selected for implementation in your community. Last year, we worked with you to create what we called strategy maps for your funded RPE programs. These maps show the work you're doing, the population you intend to reach, and the setting in which your work is implemented. We're now changing the language, and these maps will be called PPP maps instead of strategy maps.
Wait, slow down before we get confused. Debra, what's changing?
Review how these programs, policies, and practices came about, so you have a bit of the history on this shift in terminology. You'll recall in episode 1, we talked about the CDC publication, the Stop SV Technical Package. CDC issued this technical package in 2016. It includes examples of evidence-based programs, policies, and practices, which is a mouthful, so we'll start referring to them as PPPs. These PPPs have been shown to have impact on sexual violence victimization and/or perpetration, or have beneficial effects on risk factors for sexual violence. In order to be listed in the Stop SV technical package, the PPPs had to meet at least one of 3 criteria for evidence rigor. You can find those specific criteria on page 10 of the technical package.
Okay, I get it now. The PPPs are listed in the Stop SV technical package.
Not exactly. Some of them are, but it's also important to understand that the Stop SV technical package is not intended to be comprehensive of all PPPs related to sexual violence prevention, not even all of the evidence-based programs. It's just one source for the PPPs.
And remember, not all PPPs are equally effective across all populations. Your community context, along with resources and partnerships, will all need to be considered when selecting the PPPs you will implement. Using PPPs from the Stop SV technical package is encouraged, but not required for all RPE grantees. If you intend to use a PPP that is not included in the Stop SV technical package, you will need to provide the evidence, either best available research evidence and/or practice-based evidence to support your PPPs. We'll talk more about that in episode 3.
Before we go into more detail about the PPPs, let's take a quick look at how they fit within the Stop SV technical package. Stop SV identifies 5 strategies. Within each strategy, there are multiple approaches that can be used to support the strategy. Implementation occurs through the PPPs, which must be aligned with the Stop SV strategy and approach, even if the PPP being implemented is not listed in the Stop SV technical package.
We do want to remind you that the strategy at the bottom, support victims, survivors to lessen harm, is not allowable as a CDC RPE program, policy, or practice, since it's not a primary prevention strategy.
Moreover, teaching skills to prevent sexual violence is an essential element for programming, but as an individual level strategy must be implemented as a component of a larger plan to reach the same population of interest with other programs, policies, or practices with impacts at the community or society level. Now we're going to talk about fitting it all together. This is an example from the first of the 5 strategies in Stop SV, Promote Social Norms that Protect Against Violence. This graphic is from the handout Flowcharts for Stop SV that has been provided to you. The strategy is at the top in this example, promoting social norms that protect against violence. The approaches are in the middle row. In this example, there are 2 approaches, bystander approach and mobilizing men and boys as allies. Programs, policies, and practices are on the bottom row. Many of you are implementing your own PPPs, not ones listed in the technical package. Episode 3 will explain more on how to document the basis for your use of PPPs that are not listed in STOP SV. If you find you need help with documenting your use of these homegrown PPPs, we can work with you on that. It's also possible you will find you need to revisit the PPPs you're using to be sure they have a sound evidence base. That's okay. This is the time to be working on that. In your handout for this episode, you will find a similar flowchart for each of the other strategies from the STOP SV package to make it easy to see the flow for each strategy. Remember, the strategies and approaches are set and cannot be changed, but the PPPs in the row at the bottom are examples. You can add other evidence-based or practice-based PPPs using the criteria that will be explained in episode 3.
I think we need more information about the PPPs, Deb.
The remainder of this episode is going to zero in on the PPPs. In their reporting requirements, CDC used the phrase programs, policies, and practices to refer to the actual work that you're implementing. In the past, in Ohio, we fit those into the categories of training, messaging, and policy work. Remember back in episode 1 when we talked about how primary prevention continues to change? In this year, we'll be segueing from those original categories of training, messaging, and policy to the categories of implementation CDC is now using. Those are what you're seeing on the screen right now. The wording that CDC uses is not always precise. We will do our best to crosswalk language and help make it clear, but acknowledge that it can be confusing, including for us. Please note of and ask when something is not clear. We talk more about these new categories of PPPs. We're going to take a short side trip. CDC actually lists a 5th category, which is social norms change. Changing social norms that are risk factors for violence represent the majority of the risk factors Ohio is aiming to impact. Since social norms change is integral to everything we do in Ohio, we expect that impacting social norms will be a key component of any program, policy, or practice that you implement. We'll talk more about the risk and protective factors in a later episode. There is more information in the resources and handouts for this episode about social norms.
We also expect you to pay attention to the impact of health equity and the role social justice plays in your prevention programming. It is necessary to pay explicit attention to every step of your program development and implementation process, and to notice opportunities to include health equity and social justice in your work.
We are constantly learning how to do this better. An example of how our understanding of this work evolves, you may have at one time seen the upper 2 squares on this diagram as examples of the value of equity rather than equality. That example was later challenged as not sufficient. The 3rd example shows a systemic change that takes away the need for individual supports.
There's still a lot of problems with the 3rd picture. For example, life is not baseball, it's a lot more complicated, and using height as a metaphor for oppression is problematic. But the 4th box allows for ongoing learning and discussion. These conversations must be embedded in everything we do.
And what I like about the 4 square is the acknowledgement that we are constantly learning.
Look in your handouts for more resources on health equity and social justice. Back from our side trip, we're pulling you back into the programs, policies, and practices.
Now that we're back from that important detour, Debra, can you please recap what has exactly changed? I got distracted by the landscape we passed on our detour.
Moving forward, your PPPs will be inclusive of one or more of the 4 categories listed here. Some of the PPPs will have program names, like Safe Dates as an educational strategy, or some aspects of shifting boundaries for creating protective environments, for example. In some cases, like social marketing, the category might also be the program name, but you could name your social marketing campaign, such as how OAESV uses the title Be the One across multiple media efforts.
We're going to talk about each of these categories individually to help you understand how they fit within your overall program maps that previously included training, messaging, and policy.
Educational strategies were listed under the heading Training in your grant application and on your current map.
Most often, an educational strategy is a curriculum provided to a specific population through multiple sessions. Safe Dates is one frequently used example of an educational strategy. There will be some settings in which the education is not multi-session. In our new prevention framing, educational strategies are inclusive of both multi-session trainings like Safe Dates and the one-time workplace trainings like the responsible bars training. A one-time training must always be a part of a multiple category PPP. So for example, that workplace training should be one component of a PPP that also includes policy change, which will be represented in the upcoming Creating Protective Environments category. Creating protective environments is most often going to be associated with programming that includes policy work, but also may have aspects related to impacting the physical environment. Creating protective environments focuses on a specific community. That may be the schools, neighborhoods, cities, organizations, workplaces, or institutions.
Implementation is focused on modifying characteristics of the community rather than the individuals within that community. Changes to policies, institutional structures, or the social or physical environment in an effort to reduce risk factors and increase protective factors that affect the entire community.
The next category is community mobilization. This category can be a bit confusing for me, so I'm sure it's confusing for others. CDC defines it using the 3 points on this slide. Community mobilization involves engaging every level of the community, with members of the community working together to follow a systematic process that promotes change. The community develops and supports actions to design and implement prevention activities. Community ownership is a key component of community mobilization. The community controls the process and has the power to make decisions in driving the efforts. The agency or organization funding the effort should facilitate the process, but not direct it.
So if you can answer, yes, we are doing this to the 3 points on the slide, then your PPP is community mobilization.
But would it count if my agency convenes or even just participates in a local coalition?
The difference has to do with both ownership and action. If the community group has shared ownership, works together to prioritize action, and works together on implementation, that's community mobilization. If the purpose of coming together is for those present to hear updates, network with each other, and provide suggestions for the work of the lead agency, that is not community mobilization.
You may have heard the concept of community-based, not community-placed. Just being in the community is not enough. The activity needs to be of and by the members of the community to count as community mobilization.
The fourth category is social marketing. Previously, an allowable area of work was messaging. We hope you have already started moving toward what will be a requirement next year, which is that all of your messaging occur within the framework of a social marketing campaign.
How will that be different?
Hopefully it won't be very different, since we have been asking you a lot of questions that are related to social marketing about your current messaging work. Key to social marketing is that you have a specific audience to which you focus your message in order to focus on behavioral change. Resources about social marketing are included at the end of this episode and in the handout. Again, if you need more assistance on how to transition from your current messaging plan to a social marketing plan, reach out. We're here to support you.
CDC has an extensive list of PPPs, but we are not limited to their list. Their list can be found as a handout for this episode. Please take some time to review the handout and your own program and distinguish what you are doing that is from the list and what you are doing that is different. Sometimes you may have started with something from their list but made changes. We will talk in future episodes about how to list those changes. It depends on how you made choices about what to change.
For those of you who decided you want to implement a policy effort, you will need to provide a little bit more information, specifically the type and focus of your policy efforts. The handout for today's episode provides the choices you will have to report about your policy work.
As a quick review, now that you have finished episode 2, you should be familiar with the Stop SV technical package and understand how to distinguish between the way CDC is defining strategies, approaches, and the PPPs.
And recognize that the PPPs refer to programs, policies, and practices, which are the way we are now referring to the actual work you're doing in your community.
The new concept that we just introduced in this episode is the new categories within the PPPs. Going forward, all of your PPPs will fit into a category of educational strategy, community mobilization, creating protective environments, or social marketing.
Don't worry if any of this is still confusing. We will work with you individually to figure out where your programs, policies, and practices fit going forward. This slide lists resources we've referenced during the episode. These and additional resources can be found in the handouts to accompany this episode.
Thank you for tuning into this episode on using continuous quality improvement or CQI process for our prevention work. Remember, we're here to support you. So if you would like to schedule an individual TA session or just bounce ideas off of us, contact any of us and we're glad to help. Special thank you to Jasmine Barfield for her techie and vlogger expertise. The result of working with her has advanced our work forward by using a different learning platform. We are very grateful. Finally, a program without CQI wouldn't be complete if I didn't ask you to fill out the evaluation following this episode. Your input will help us with future episodes and identify if we need additional resources. Please join us for our next episode. We will be discussing what is evidence.